السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين. قال الله في كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. وصلوا على محمد وآل محمد. The Quran places a great emphasis on all Muslims to maintain the bonds of brotherhood and the bonds of blood relationships. And the benefits of that are not only asserted through the religious text, but also are known and asserted and acknowledged scientifically and historically. Psychologists and scientists, they agree that if you examine the origins and the early nature of human beings, if you go back to our ancestors thousands of years, that our ancestors lived amongst one another, they slept next to each other, they ate next to each other, they defended one another, they lived in small packs, in small groups. And so fast forward that thousands of years, human beings have not evolved out of that attribute, the attribute to have a desire and a need for social contact. It's still very much part of who we are. Even though in the Western world, we've now moved away from much of that behavior. So people live alone, they sleep alone, they work alone in little cubicles. They take their breaks alone. They even vacation alone. And a recent study, showed that up to 25% of Americans, a very, very large number of people, have no meaningful, regular social interaction, meaning that they don't have it on a regular basis. And so, when you look at the rise in rates of anxiety and depression, a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've become isolated. And if you think about it, see in prison, as an example, in prison, when a prisoner is not behaving, when he's not on his best behavior, a form of punishment is to isolate that prisoner. In itself, that isolation is a form of punishment. But as human beings, we're hardwired. We crave social interaction. It's in our blood, it's in our flesh. So much so that if you look at babies, once they're cognizant to a certain degree of what's going on around them, not only do they cry if they're hungry or if they're feeling ill, but they also cry when they're feeling lonely, when they're left alone. So they crave company. In fact, you know, it's miraculous. If you've ever had the chance to visit the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit at the hospital, and that's where babies are taken when they're born, if they are born, primarily if they're born underweight, if they're born premature. And that's where doctors and nurses keep a close eye on them. And it's very fascinating because and I had a chance recently to learn this from a few doctors, is that babies that are born underweight and underage, they crave being around a nurse or a doctor or their parents. So much so that one of the types of therapy that is encouraged is what is known as skin-to-skin therapy or kangaroo therapy, and that's where the mother or the father places the child on their skin. And that's said to help with heartbeat regulation and with breathing regulation. So as soon as the baby is placed on the skin of the parents, or it can be the skin of anyone really, but specifically the parent, it regulates their heartbeat and it regulates their breathing ability. And you know, that's a common challenge that premature babies face, is because the lungs are the last organs in the body, one of the last organs in the body to develop in the womb of the mother. So one challenge that premature babies face is breathing. And subhanAllah, you know, it's so miraculous, because what science tells us is that when that baby is placed on the skin, especially the skin of the mother, something very miraculous happens. The baby transfers something, some elements to the mother, which assists in the creation or the production of breast milk, and that breast milk is engineered specifically for that baby with certain antibodies which go along with the genetic makeup of that child, which specifically work as a defense against sicknesses and as a defense against illnesses. That skin-to-skin interaction, that kangaroo therapy, it assists in the production of breast milk. You know, when you read the story, it's fascinating, because when you read the story of the upbringing of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's said that Halima Sa'diyah, the lady who nursed the Prophet, and even though his mother was around, Amina bint Wahab, she was around, but it was a custom of the Arabs, especially the ones that lived within the cities, because only a few decades earlier, only a few centuries earlier, the Arabs were still a nomadic people, meaning that they would travel from one place to another in search for food and water. So the people of Mecca, only recently had they become sedentary, meaning that only recently they had settled down. They recognized that there was a merit to sending their children out into the desert to be raised by the nomads and the people of the desert. They believed that by doing so, they would acquire certain behaviors and certain characteristics and certain abilities to defend themselves. And it would almost make them immune to some diseases. It would almost make them immune to some sicknesses. In the same way where if you want to toughen someone up today, you send them to a boot camp. Back home, as a punishment to young men, they shave their heads and they send them to the military. And that's where they get their proper training. They'll send them out into the wilderness, and sometimes they have to fend for themselves. Even here in the United States, you know, if you've ever watched these shows, or if you're familiar with the process, that whenever someone wants to rank up in the military, if they want to join the Navy SEALs or the Green Berets or any sort of special forces, well, they have to go out into the wilderness. That's where they have to prove themselves, because out there in the wilderness, and sometimes certain activities are conducted where they're given just basic instruments to where they have to cut their own wood, they have to hunt for their own food, they have to learn how to create their own fires, they have to learn how to bandage themselves if they get wounded. All of those are characteristics that they acquire out into the wilderness. So the Arabs understood this. So even though the Prophet had a mother, he was sent out with Halima Sa'diyah so that he can be nursed, he can be breastfed, and he can acquire some of those characteristics. And it's so interesting because Halima Sa'diyah says the following. She says that when I came to Medina, when I came to Mecca, she did so because of a need for food and water and subsistence. Because where she lived, they were experiencing some sort of drought, and the food had ran out, the water had ran out. So they came to Mecca in order, hopefully, to find something to take back with them. It just so happened that nobody wanted to nurse the Prophet, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Muhammad. Because he had lost his father, and he had lost his father before he was born, they looked at him, they looked down upon him. They said, this is an orphan. Who would want to take care of an orphan? But it just so happened that Halima Sa'diyah was desperate. So she took him in, she brought him back. She says, as soon as I brought the child back, as soon as I accepted him into my arms, as soon as I embraced him, all of a sudden, I was able to nurse and I was able to breastfeed again. She said, I had run dry, I could not even breastfeed. But as soon as I embraced him, as soon as I held him close, I was able to breastfeed again. As she brought the Prophet to her people, the cows, all of a sudden the cows fattened up again. And their udders were full of milk. The crops, the grains, they began to grow again. So the Prophet brought his blessings, the Prophet brought his miraculous spirit with him. So there's a lot of merit, not only religiously, but historically and scientifically, to human social interaction. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إن الله يأمر, and this is in Surah An-Nahl, chapter number 16. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. God commands us to 3 things, and He refrains us from 3 things. The 3 things that He commands to is adl, which is justice, ihsan, which is virtue or benevolence, and the third, which is tantamount to the first 2, is إيتاء ذي القربى. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. إيتاء ذي القربى means to give to the closest of kin. And He refrains you from 3. وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي. So deception, wrongfulness, and rebelliousness. In another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the believers. He says, وَالَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ وَاجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. Oh Allah, allow our families, our wives, our spouses, our husbands, and our progenies to be a source of pride for us. That's a description of the believers. That they strive to have their families be a source of pride. وَاجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. Meaning allow us to be proud of our families to the point where people look up to us. We're put in a position of leadership or authority and influence. And people look up to us as an example of good conduct, of good behavior. So there's a lot of merit to maintaining the bonds of brotherhood and to social interaction. I was reading in a book the other day, and it was saying that when you maintain the bonds of social interaction, because as human beings we're hardwired to do that, that just maintaining good social contact, especially within the closest of kin, within close family members, people who you have trust and rapport with, that in itself can assist in alleviating depression. And when scientists did studies across the world, the example they found were the people of Papua New Guinea. And you've probably studied this if you've studied social science or in anthropology, is that the people of Papua New Guinea, they're brought as an example in anthropology, in that if you study that group of people, you would find that depression is almost non-existent amongst them. It doesn't exist. And so they studied their diet, their living ways, their behaviors. They found that number 1, they're out and about all the time. They don't work in cubicles. They get a good amount of sunlight. They get a good amount of sleep. Their diets are rich in nutrients. They get a good amount of vitamins, vitamin D. Their diets are rich in omega-3 fatty acids. And most of all, they live in tight-knit quarters. They live in tight-knit families. So family is very, very important. They do everything together. They hunt together. They defend together. And because of that, not only do they have the lowest rates of depression across the world, but they also have the highest rates of happiness. Why is this important? Because understanding, and as we mentioned yesterday, understanding the significance and the importance and the impact of discussing mental health within our communities. Because unfortunately, depression, anxiety, loneliness, all of that is skyrocketing within our communities, and especially in Western communities. And it's something that not only afflicts the old, but also the young as well. If you read the statistics, for people who are in elementary and junior high and high school and college, who are affected by depression, it's skyrocketing, it's staggering. And so you begin to see the wisdom, the hikmah behind the verses of the Quran which command us to maintain the bonds of brotherhood and of blood, especially of blood relationships. And so the closest of kin are regularly enumerated amongst those who are entitled to assistance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also teaches us in the Holy Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ, obey God, worship God. وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا, do not associate partners with God. And the second command that arrives immediately after the worship of God and immediately after not associating partners with God is what? وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Virtue, benevolence towards your parents, respect and honor towards your parents. And this was a critical issue at the time, especially during if you consider the dynamics and the complexities regarding the formation of the early Muslim community. Because you had families that were almost torn apart, some of them split in the middle, including the family of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Where some of them had embraced Iman, some of them had embraced the true faith, and some of them had remained on their disbelieving ways. And the Quran mentions by name, the Quran mentions Abu Lahab, Tabbat yada Abi Lahabin wa tab, cursed or damned are the hands of Abu Lahab, meaning the actions of Abu Lahab. Abu Lahab was the uncle of the Prophet, his paternal uncle, his father's brother. There were other members of the Prophet's family who did not accept Islam. They did not accept Iman right away. Families of the companions of the Prophet were split in the middle. You had children, sons and daughters, who accepted Islam and Iman, but parents who did not, and vice versa, where parents did and children did not. And sometimes they found themselves on differing ends of the battlefield. And so it was a cause, for some of the companions, it was a cause for confusion. Is that how do we treat our parents? Because the Quran talks about disbelief and how to treat disbelievers. But what if those disbelievers are your own family members? You know, there's always that relative, that cousin, that uncle that's not always on board with the rest of the family. So how do you treat them? وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. So number one, it commands to have virtue, to show virtue, display virtue and manifest it, and compassion and benevolence towards your parents, even if you don't obey them in matters of faith. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu la tattakhidhu aba'akum wa ikhwanakum awliya'a in istahabbu al-kufra ala al-iman. O you who believe, do not take your fathers and your brothers, and this is just an example, it doesn't have to be a father or brother, but the prime examples of authority and influence in people's lives are usually their fathers and their brothers. It could be an uncle, such as in the case of the Prophet Ibrahim ala nabina wa ala alihi afdalu salatu wassalam, with his uncle Azar. We believe in the Ahlul Bayt school of thought that Azar was not his father, but rather he was his uncle, the figure that raised him. And he had influence over him, but Ibrahim, because he could distinguish between belief and disbelief. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَذَلِكَ نُرِي إِبْرَاهِيمَ مَلَكُوتَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, that we showed him malakut. Malakut means the inner aspect of things. We were able to show him the inner aspect, and he was able to distinguish between belief and disbelief at a young age, that he understood that even though this is my uncle, this is a person who is a father figure to me, but I know where the line begins and ends in terms of influence, in terms of the influence of faith and religion and behavior. So the Quran says that don't take your fathers and your brothers awliya, meaning again awliya referring to the people of authority, in istahabbu al-kufra ala al-iman, if they prefer disbelief over belief. And it's very, very much easier said than done. You know, one of the stories that we're told in the Quran is the story of Abdullah ibn Ubay. Abdullah ibn Ubay was one of the munafiqun, one of the hypocrites that lived in Medina. And he's mentioned in the Quran by reference. يَقُولُونَ لَإِنْ رَجَعْنَا إِلَى الْمَدِينَةِ لَنُخْرِجَنَّ الْأَعَزُّ مِنْهَا الْأَذَلِ. And so that verse in Surah Al-Munafiqun, which comes immediately after Surah Al-Jumu'ah, is a reference to the attempted plot which was plotted and planned by Abdullah ibn Ubay to overthrow the Prophet from his leadership position. And that one day the Prophet and the Muslims were going out for a battle, an expedition, and he stayed back and he gathered a few of the hypocrites that remained in Medina, and he said, well, you know, essentially let's stage a coup d'etat. Let's get rid of this man. Al-Adhal, and he referred to the Prophet as Adhal. Adhal meaning Zalil, meaning the low life, the lowly one. Now, even though Abdullah ibn Ubay was a hypocrite, he had a son also by the name of Abdullah, who was the exact opposite. The fruit had fallen very far from the tree. He was a believer. And sometimes that happens in some families. Sometimes you have a father that's not on the path of Iman, that's not on the path of belief, but the son emerges into belief. Or the opposite way around. The Quran tells us the story of the young man that Musa came and saw, and he took his life. I'm sorry, the Prophet Khidr, when Musa was accompanying Khidr, took his life, and Musa turns to him and he says, what's going on? Why'd you take this man's life? This young man's life? And the explanation of Khidr, it's something which today still baffles people, is that I could see that if this young man was to grow, I could see into his future that he was going to make his parents who were believers, he was going to turn them to disbelief. And so sometimes that happens. Sometimes you have belief which emerges from disbelief, and sometimes you have disbelief that emerges from belief. So when Abdullah Jr., the son of Abdullah ibn Ubay, heard about this, some of the Muslims, they turned to Rasulullah, they said, Ya Rasulullah. He said, you know, he's proven himself to be a hypocrite. He's proven himself to have intent to harm the Muslims. And, you know, that's treachery, that's treason. And so the punishment for that is death. And so when Abdullah Jr., when he heard that, he said, Ya Rasulullah, whatever you decide, then you decide. If you decide that my father is going to be killed, then that's your choice, that's your decision. But I have a request, that if you do decide that he is going to be killed, I want to be the one that kills him. He says, number one, I want to show you how loyal I am. And number two, he says that if somebody else kills my father, I don't want it to be the case where, God forbid, down the road, I see this person, and because of, he says, Ya Rasulullah, we still have the remnants of Jahiliyyah within us. That when we see a person who's hurt us, we want to take revenge. Remember, Medina, you had the 100 Years' War between the Aus and the Khazraj, where the motive behind the war was simply to get back at the other side. That was their motive. Meaning that they had fought war against one another for so long that they had forgotten the reason why they were fighting in the first place. the lust for revenge had completely consumed them. It had completely consumed their mindset, their behavior, and their ways. So he said, Ya Rasulullah, because I don't want to see this person down the road and then want to take my revenge. So let it be me. I'll be the person. So sometimes belief can also emerge from disbelief. And so sometimes, you know, we have family members and they're not on board with us. They're not on board with our ways. And the Quran reveals verses to address that issue specifically. And the Prophet was no different. The Prophet had an Abu Lahab. If you examine the life of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, you know, we tend to, when we talk about the oppression of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, we tend to highlight whom? Banu Umayyah, Muawiyah, Yazid ibn Muawiyah, Marwan, Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. But do you know who is more violent and more atrocious and more intense in their hatred and their animosity towards the Ahlul Bayt? The ones who came right after, Banu al-Abbas. Banu al-Abbas took the oppression of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam to another level. Now Banu Umayyah were distant cousins. Banu al-Abbas were the descendants of whom? Al-Abbas, who was the uncle of the Prophet. So they were cousins. They were almost first cousins. But they took that atrocity and they took that animosity and that hatred to another level. In fact, you know, one of the things that they did was when they planned to take over the rule, when they planned to take over from Banu Umayyah, Banu Umayyah fell during the year 132 after Hijrah. And this is where Banu Abbas rose. Their revolution took place on the day of Ashura, the 10th of Muharram. And they emerged from the masjid all wearing black, and their slogan was what? Ar-Ridha min Ali Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. So apparently from the outside what it looked like was that their intention was to avenge what had happened all those many years to the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. And that they were here to avenge the massacre that took place in Karbala by the hands of the Umayyads. Now, they first proposed to support the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. So this was during the time of, chronologically, it was during the time of the 6th Imam, Imam Ja'far bin Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhi salam. So they came to the Imam. And they knew that they were not going to get the approval that they wanted. Because initially, what they stated their intention was, we're going to get rid of Banu Umayyah, but then we're going to bring the Imams of Ahlul Bayt back. They're going to be the khulafa, they're going to be the political as well as the religious rulers. And of course the 6th Imam, he could see through that. So because they didn't have the support of the 6th Imam, who did they go to? They went to Muhammad, who was known as An-Nafs al-Zakiyah. Muhammad was the son of Abdullah, who was the son of Al-Hasan al-Muthanna. Al-Hasan al-Muthanna was the son of Al-Hasan al-Mujtaba, the 2nd Imam of the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. And so Muhammad said, okay, you have my support and you have my blessings. Now what happened? They took over, and the first of them to take over was Abu al-Abbas, aka As-Saffah. Saffah means the executioner, because he became notorious, and he earned that title when he gathered all of the members that remained of Banu Umayyah after they displaced them from the Khilafah. They gathered all of them to what it looked like to honor them, but he chopped their heads off one by one. He was the executioner. One of them ran away, Abdurrahman. He escaped and he went through North Africa and he went to Spain, and that's where the Umayyad dynasty in Spain emerges from the lineage of Abdurrahman, the one that got away. And they ruled for hundreds of years in Spain, and that's how Spain became under the influence of Islam, Al-Andalus, and then they started fighting one another again, and they started killing one another. They couldn't get along with one another. So Abu al-Abbas comes in, and they realize that we spearheaded this entire campaign. So what did they begin to do? Now, they couldn't say that, okay, well, we're not going to support Muhammad al-Nafs al-Zakiyya. So they began to defame him. They began to defame his character. Some of you have probably heard the rumor that spread, or the propaganda, that accuses al-Imam al-Hasan al-Mujtaba alayhi salam of becoming a habitual divorcer. That was part of the propaganda that was spread not by Banu Umayyah, but by whom? Banu al-Abbas. See, Banu Umayyah and Muawiyah, one reason why he was so successful is because he had a propaganda machine. He was able to pay off people who had credibility during the life of the Prophet and during the life of the companions to spread lies about the Ahlul Bayt. But it was not until the time of Banu al-Abbas that papyrus was introduced into the Muslim empire, when they made Baghdad as their capital, and that's what Orientalists refer to as the Islamic Golden Era. Because papyrus, paper, was made available. They didn't have to write on camel bones and skins anymore. And that's when they began translating works from Persian and from Sanskrit and from Greek and from all of those various languages into Arabic. And that's where Baghdad became, quote unquote, the capital of Islamic civilization. That's what they call the Islamic Golden Era. And that's when they began to write. But Banu al-Abbas were more proficient in their propaganda. So what does Abu Ja'far al-Mansur do? The one that comes after Abu al-Abbas al-Safah, the second caliph. Now by this time they've already made up their mind that the Ahlul Bayt, meaning that the sons of Ali ibn Abi Talib, either from Al-Hasan or from Hussein, they have nothing to do with this rule anymore. We fought for this, we earned this, and it belongs to us. So what did they do? Much like what happens today in political campaigns. Character defamation. Big media outlets. Hashtag fake news. It's nothing new. It's not a new phenomenon. It's gone on for centuries. So these guys were the proponents of fake news. So what does Abu Ja'far al-Mansur do? Abu Ja'far al-Mansur stands up and he says, why should we even trust Muhammad al-Nafs al-Zakiyya? Look into his lineage. His grandfather al-Hasan al-Mujtaba, he abdicated and he gave up and he gave in to the desires and the wishes of Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan. So if the grandfather is weak, if the grandfather is weak, then what do you expect of the grandson? And then he says, look at Al-Hasan. He says he was a habitual divorcer. He would marry one day and divorce the other day, and marry one day and divorce the other day. And this was the claim. And some historians and some Orientalists, they hopped on the bandwagon. And by the way, much of the scholarship that's produced by Orientalists, and this is why we need Muslim intellectuals who are able to produce high quality content. Because a lot of the content, the historical content, unfortunately, that we read comes from Orientalists. People who jumped on the wagon and people who had their own intentions of how they imagined and how they fantasized what early Islamic history looks like. And so some of them said that Al-Hasan al-Mujtaba married and divorced 70 women. Some of them said 90 women. Some of them said 250 women. And some of them, the highest estimate is 300 women. As if the Imam had nothing to do except to marry and divorce. Now, to make a long story short, there's been a lot of research that has been done, and it was physically and chronologically impossible for the Imam to do that. A good reference is the book, The Succession to Muhammad by Wilfred Madelung, and he's a professor at Oxford University. And this book, it looks at history from the side and support of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. So building the case for Khilafah from the side of Al-Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And so in that book he says that if we're very, very generous, the most amount of women that the Imam could have married and divorced is 11. That's if we're very, very generous. Nowhere near 70 or 90 or 250 or 300. But where did that defamation of character originate from? It didn't come from Yazid ibn Muawiyah. It didn't come from the people of the book that are condemned in the Quran. The ones who turned their swords against the Prophet. It didn't come from the idolaters of Mecca. It didn't come from the mushrikeen of Ta'if. It came from within the family. So sometimes bala and fitna can come from within the family. And that's the message of the Quran. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu la tattakhidhu aba'akum wa ikhwanakum awliya'a in istahabbul kufra ala al-iman. So knowing where to draw the line of obedience and how not to mix that with respect. See, respect is one thing and obedience is another thing. So moving along, what the Quran also says is that your obligation to provide for your family members, and provide does not only mean monetarily provide. Sometimes our family members, our parents, our relatives, our cousins, our brothers and sisters, they don't need our monetary support. What do they need? They need our emotional support. They need our spiritual support. The Quran says, do not allow your support to your family members be held back by personal grudges. So sometimes we allow personal grudges to get in the way. This person owes me a certain amount of money, so I hold a personal grudge. And because I hold a personal grudge, I'm never going to support this person in any way, shape, or form. Or this person said something to me many years ago and they belittled me, and because of that I'm going to hold back. I'm not going to give this person monetary support, and I'm not going to give this person emotional support and love. You know, the Quran spends a great deal of verses teaching the believers not to hold grudges against one another, especially when it comes to family members. And a golden rule to follow is never to take anything personally. So there's a book I was reading, and I recommend this book to you all. It's called The Four Agreements. It's basically 4 laws to live by if you're looking for personal freedom. One of those laws is never take anything personally. Don't hold grudges. And what the author says is something very interesting. He says that most of the time in our world, in our day-to-day world, in our day-to-day lives, we walk around and we take things personally. Anything anybody says to us, we take personally. The Quran says, وَلَا يَأْتَلِ أُولُو الْفَضْلِ مِنْكُمْ وَالسَّعَةِ أَنْ يُؤْتُوا أُولِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْمَسَاكِينَ. So don't allow anything to hold you back. Personal grudges, personal vendettas. Don't allow that to hold you back from supporting people that you are able to support and whose obligation it is for you to support. So the author of this book, he says something interesting. He says most of the time we take things personally, and we don't understand that when people project their negativity and their bias upon us, most of the time it actually has nothing to do with us, and it has everything to do with them. So people have negativity and hatred and animosity that's bottled within themselves, and the way that they're able to release that is by projecting that on other people, and sometimes you fall in the way. So he gives an example. He says, how do you not take anything personally? He says, well, if you're walking down the street one day and someone turns to you and this person doesn't know you at all, they have no idea who you are, and they say, hey, you, they get your attention. They say, you're stupid. He says, if that affects you and you take that personally, he says, probably there's something within yourself that believes that you're stupid. There's something within you that believes that you're unintelligent. And so you acknowledge it. And you take something that's somebody else's problem, and now you've made it something that's your problem. And the way to be free and to live with freedom is that you don't take anything personally. So when someone says something horrible to you, now that person doesn't have to be a random person on the street. Most of the time, random people on the street don't say anything to us. Most people are looking down on their steering wheel or looking down on their phone behind their steering wheel, and they're not paying attention to you. So sometimes that abuse, that word, that negativity can come within your own from within your own family. Maybe it's a parent, an uncle, a cousin. And that truly affects our psyche if we allow it to affect our psyche. It affects us on the inside if we allow it to affect us on the inside. So what the Quran teaches us is don't hold personal grudges. See, if you never take anything personally, you'll never hold any personal grudges. And when you give people, you'll give them out of the kindness and out of the love of your own heart, without expectation. Whether they reciprocate that in kind, or whether they do not reciprocate that in kind. So, since we are in the final days of Ramadan, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to remove any of the hatred or the animosity or the negativity or any of the personal grudges that we have in our hearts towards our believing brothers and sisters, our family members, our closest of kin. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sincerely in the final days of this month, as we count down until the days of Eid, that He forgives us. He makes us recipients of His forgiveness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, وَلْيَعْفُوا وَلْيَصْفَحُوا, in chapter number 24, Surah An-Nur, وَلْيَعْفُوا وَلْيَصْفَحُوا أَلَا تُحِبُّونَ أَن يَغْفِرَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. Have afu in your heart. Have forgiveness and mercy and compassion for other people. Do you not wish that God is merciful and compassionate towards you? I mean, imagine if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala held back on the Day of Judgment and said that, I'm not going to forgive you because you have not forgiven this person. Imagine if God treated us in the same way that we treat people around us. If God held grudges against us in the same way that we held grudges against other people. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove the grudges from our hearts. Oh Allah, mend our relationships with our brothers in Iman, and those who are closest of kin to us. Oh Allah, allow us to repair our relationships with one another. Oh Allah, make us recipients of your divine mercy and compassion and your forgiveness. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring aid and relief to all of those worldwide who are in need of our dua, in need of our supplication. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك قاضي الحاجات إنك على كل شيء قدير برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.